Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about as Taliban march on in Afghanistan and Pakistan's role in Afghanistan and America's role in Afghanistan diminishes the way that they've left. We'll be talking about Afghan peace process and Pakistan's role in it. When we talk about Afghan rehabilitation after the Americans leave, what is Pakistan's stance on it? How do we perceive the next couple of months to go as far as the Afghan peace process is concerned, as far as Pakistan's role in Afghanistan is concerned? All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Yasir Janjua, who's a security analyst. Thank you for joining us today. Hassan Khan, who is an Afghan affairs expert. Thank you for being with us. Michael Kugelman, who is Deputy Director, South Asia Wilson Center. Thank you for joining us. Yasir Saab, let's start off with you. Like I said, of course, recently we were just now talking about the fact that Americans have accepted Pakistan's role in Afghanistan, in the Afghan peace process. Whether they accept it or not, we've said that, when they choose to respond, it's fine. If they don't choose to respond, that's also fine. But our stance now, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, the Prime Minister also said that our leverage, in his words, has diminished. How do you see our role in Afghanistan now?
See, Mahrukh, Prime Minister Imran Khan has been categoric in his statements, and the policy statement coming out from the Foreign Office also in the past has been very categorically saying Pakistan will not enforce a plan on the Afghans. It's the Afghan-led decision about who they choose and who governs the country. Pakistan will not influence any decisions of who runs Afghanistan post-American withdrawal. And that is why Pakistan has been taking a backseat, although Pakistan was very, very key player in the talks in bringing the Taliban and the Americans to the talking table. However, Pakistan has always maintained that peace in Pakistan is directly proportional to peace in Afghanistan. So Pakistan has a very, very keen eye over what's going on in Afghanistan, whether it is the influx of refugees because of the civil unrest or some terrorism activities in Pakistan. Unlikely, although because of what we think, we are prepared and we have taken our defenses well in proper. However, Pakistan would not want to go beyond a certain limit in involving itself in Afghan affairs, so that eventually the backlash comes on Pakistan. So Pakistan, and today DGISPR statement you must have heard, is also reiterating the same fact that Pakistan would not want to be party to any mediation or any conversations in who forms the government, which is very, very understandable from Pakistan's point of view. Pakistan does not want to be party to one party, and Pakistan wants to remain neutral. And that neutrality of Pakistan is actually very important for our future relationship with any Afghan government and our future relationship with the rest of the world vis-a-vis the Afghan peace process. Because we don't want to be termed as going into one bloc per se and then getting embroiled into that war that already has been last 40 years. Pakistan, one way or the other, has been involved. So Pakistan, and the Prime Minister's view has been very clear. There is no military solution to Afghanistan, and the Afghans should decide their own future. So from that standpoint, we take a neutral stance.
Right, let me come back to you. Hassan Saab, I'll just come back to you. I'm going to go to Michael Kugelman. Michael, how do you see, do you see the role of Pakistan to be a largely diminished one as far as Afghanistan is concerned? Or, of course, we still remain relevant, but pursuant to what the Prime Minister has said, do you think that the role Pakistan can play now has decreased considerably?
I don't think so, at least in terms of its diplomatic role. I think that Pakistan, even though it may not have as much leverage over the Taliban as it did in previous years, and I know this is the position of the government in Pakistan, it continues to have considerable influence over the Taliban, and probably more so than any other regional player. There was a point where I think the U.S. had the most leverage over the Taliban compared to anyone. But with the troops leaving and with the withdrawal nearly complete, the U.S. has lost a lot of its leverage vis-a-vis the Taliban. So certainly here in Washington, the view will be that Islamabad will be looked at as a key player in the broader peace process, because it still retains the ability to wield some type of influence over the Taliban. But, I think that the problem is is that the battlefield situation right now in Afghanistan has become so fraught, and the Taliban has, of course, been enjoying all types of battlefield victories with all of these offenses and these territorial takeovers, that I think that no matter what Pakistan, or any other country for that matter, tries to do in terms of pressuring the Taliban to come back to the negotiating table, I think it's unlikely the Taliban would be interested in that now. It would need to suffer some type of setback militarily first, so that it would feel compelled to actually sit down. It's got all the strength, the Taliban, right now, and I think that as much as the U.S. and others may want Pakistan to try to ramp up its diplomatic role in terms of engaging with the Taliban to redirect the Taliban to the peace table, I don't think there's all that much that it can do at the end of the day. But clearly, it's going to be, to answer your question very simply, I don't think that the view here in Washington is that Pakistan's role should diminish, at least not diplomatically, just because of
that. The way that America has treated Pakistan, the way that they've, responded, considerably later, and the way that they have seen the role that Pakistan has played in this, now, isn't it a little too late for Washington to now acknowledge that Pakistan has played considerable role in the peace process?
Well, I think that there's actually been pretty consistent public messaging from certainly the Trump administration during its last few months, and now with the Biden administration, there has been acknowledgement of the important role that Pakistan plays. I mean, as you know, the U.S. Secretary of State just had a call with your foreign minister the other day, and as I understand it, it was a very positive call, and the readouts from both sides were very positive, and the U.S. had said that, we recognize Pakistan as an important regional player, and so on and so forth. So I think that's there, and I know that some are unhappy that there has not been a call, that President Biden has not had a call with Prime Minister Khan. There's reason to be unhappy about that, but I don't think that's an indication that the U.S. is not willing to acknowledge the important role that it views Pakistan playing in this broader peace process. There have been a number of conversations, a number of high-level calls, and so I think that, at least for the immediate future, as long as the U.S. continues to be engaged in the peace process in Afghanistan, it will continue to look to Pakistan as the country that has to play that key role. But certainly, if things go downhill and the peace process really collapses, certainly you will see the U.S. likely will find a way to blame Pakistan for that for some way, just because of the high expectations that the U.S. has of Pakistan in that regard.
Right. Okay. I hope that you will stay with us, Michael, for a little bit more. I will come back to you. Right. Hassan, how do you see this? Do you agree with this? You think that, according to Michael, America will find a way to blame us if this goes south, but other than that, he thinks that America has acknowledged Pakistan's role as far as Afghanistan is concerned, and has been consistent in acknowledging what Pakistan has achieved.
Look, Mahrukh, I think I definitely, to an extent, agree with Michael that you can't diminish the role of Pakistan, because as far as Afghan issue is concerned, Pakistan is a party. In a way, it's part of, I don't use the word party, is part of the whole last four decades, more than 4 decades. So you can't say that Pakistan's role is either diminished or somebody will say Pakistan doesn't have any role to play there, because Afghan issue is after Afghan, I think Pakistan will definitely suffer the most. So as previously there were times when Pakistan sometimes reduced its role in the affairs of Afghanistan, and you see then Pakistan has to pay a lot of price for that, because in Kabul, Pakistan was gradually term as irrelevant. So then Pakistan has to restart. Currently, at the moment, definitely U.S. interest in Afghanistan has gone to a great extent down. U.S. is no more interested in, as President Biden said, now this is the responsibility of the Afghan leadership to set together and chart out their future, what type of government they want, how they need to be governed, etc., what type of laws they want. So Biden has made that clear. And when a reporter asked him, in case the Taliban take over Kabul, there is a civil war, so Biden referred that question to the regional countries, that the regional countries are more concerned about such a situation, and we will see whether that threatens the American interest or not. If America is secure, so American will not be that much interested in going to Kabul again or going to Afghanistan. One. Two, I think as the US has cleared its intention vis-a-vis Afghanistan. So now I think greater role falls, and I agree with President Biden when he said that a greater role has to be played by the regional country. In the regional country, we have China, we have Russia, we have Pakistan, and we have Iran. And you see that Taliban were in Tehran, they visited Tehran, the Kabul, the government interlocutors were also there, led by the former Vice President Yunus Qanuni, and there was a team of Taliban, they were in Moscow. So it means that as the US has not shut its door, but they had quit Afghanistan, and by 31st August, I think the remaining troops are already gone to a minimum level. So there will be more reduced interest in Afghanistan. So Pakistan has to be active now. I don't agree with some of my leaders, especially the government leaders, when they say that we are not that much proactive to play a role. I think we have to take a step. We have to be proactive because this is the time. If we played the ball between the Taliban and the US, and we make Taliban agree to sit with the US and even sign an agreement. So I think this is now the time for Pakistan to play its active role. And to an extent, I'm also of the opinion that Pakistan has certain influence over Taliban. Not only Taliban, but the other leaders, especially the Mujahideen leader, especially the other ethnic leaders in Afghanistan. So I think this is the time, instead of leaving the seat for Iran, leaving the seat for Moscow or Beijing, etc., this is the time for Pakistani leadership to take a step forward, be more proactive instead of waiting for somebody to call them and come and join the table. So I think we have done that blunder in the past. And again, this is what I am telling my own leaders, government leaders in Islamabad, that once we have done that, we make ourselves irrelevant in Kabul for a longer period, and we paid a price for it, because the other, when there is a vacuum, definitely your opponent will come and fill that vacuum. So now this time, if Pakistani leadership is saying that we are waiting for somebody to call and then we will join them, I think no, we need to call others to come and join us, to play a role, make the Afghan government and the Taliban sit, not only make them, force them to have an agreement, because disturb Afghanistan, unstable Afghanistan, internally, I think that in case of a civil war Afghanistan, Pakistan will be the major sufferer.
Right, let me come back to you. Yasif, do you agree? You think that Pakistan should play that kind of role, the kind of proactive role that Hassan Saab is talking about, where, you know, we call people, we get involved to that extent? Do you think it's
Unfortunately, I don't agree with my colleague here. The reason is, if there's anything that goes south, in case of a civil war, in case of a lot of fatalities, so everyone's going to blame Pakistan.
Haven't we sacrificed enough?
And we don't want to do that. This time we are trying to be, this is my opinion, and I think this is what the government, I'm not a government spokesperson, but I think this is what the thinking is at the leadership level, that eventually, because everyone is saying, and there is a likelihood of bloodshed and civil war, Pakistan doesn't want to take the blame from the Americans. Look, you had leverage over Afghans and you couldn't do anything.
Which is what essentially, you know, Michael also said. He said that, you know, if things don't work out, America is going to blame Pakistan.
And we don't want to take the blame. Yes, we do have the leverage over Taliban. We will use our backdoor channels to try and... Look, it is because of the Pakistanis that the Taliban have, these Taliban that we are now seeing today, they are not the Taliban before 2001.
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
They are, okay.
Yeah.
So what we are trying to do here is, we are trying to remain, just taking a back seat and see what they are going to do. And if they need our help, we will be there for supporting, but we will not intervene.
Right.
We won't want to play a proactive role. Right. And Prime Minister has been very clear about it. So I think we should, as a matter of fact, not get involved proactively or actively, as he was mentioning. It's his point of view, he's entitled to it, and so am I. But I think let the Afghans tackle their own, they sort their own mess out, and they should be.
And the Prime Minister said that, you know, he also said whoever has a legitimate government, we will acknowledge it as the... But what about, let's move on, what about China's involvement in Afghanistan particularly? Do you think that will increase? Hassan Saab, do you think that, you know, of course, there will be a vacuum when the Americans leave, and there is you know, a thinking which talks about that the fact that there will be a vacuum and that another superpower will then move in to fill that. Do you agree with that?
I think, first let me clear one point. I'm not talking of interfering in an Afghan affair.
Right.
I am talking of playing a role as Iran is doing it, as Moscow is doing it, as Beijing and other countries are doing it. Because in case of a civil war or in case of unrest in Afghanistan, I will be the major sufferer. I will have to take the refugees, whether I want it or not. So my country already suffered a lot during the last 40 years due to the Afghan war. So how can I leave a seat vacant at the time when I have to play a role? Because in case of civil war, Iran will not be that suffer, neither Moscow, neither Beijing. I have to suffer. So that's one thing. As far as Beijing is concerned, I think Beijing is already they are concerned over the emerging situation in Afghanistan, as any other country is. So definitely, I think it's, the extended Troika. Beijing was part of it. It was the U.S., China, and Pakistan, and they agreed over certain things in the extended Troika. I mean, they said that we will not accept those who take over Afghanistan by guns. So Beijing is definitely, because Beijing and Islamabad have almost identical view vis-a-vis Afghanistan. Because if Pakistan wants its geoeconomic policy, because Pakistan has changed it from geostrategic, geopolitical to geoeconomics. So geoeconomics, until and unless Afghanistan is not secure, until and unless Afghanistan is not stable, so you can't pursue your geoeconomic policy. Neither the Chinese CPEC project or the one which they are using via Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, etc. So a stable Afghanistan is in the interest of Beijing. A stable Afghanistan is in the interest of Afghanistan, in the interest of Pakistan. So definitely Beijing has an eye over the situation. What the Americans have done, I think that's quite strange for everybody, because they shut the door for Bagram and left Afghanistan in the midst of the darkness, without informing even the Afghan forces to take over the situation there, and then the looters and the local people come over and they loot too many things. So I think the regional countries, especially Pakistan, China, Moscow, Iran, etc., they are looking at the way the U.S. is conducting itself in Afghanistan. And I think U.S., at the moment, what the U.S. is doing, though publicly we are saying the U.S. has done it properly, but they have not done it properly. Pakistan has concerned the way U.S. has left Afghanistan. Iran has concerned, Moscow has concerned, because we were waiting, we were expecting the U.S. to quit Afghanistan, at least when there is a type of some semblance of what we call it a government agreement in both the parties, the Afghan parties, who are talking in Doha. At least they agree over some sort of a mechanism, how to run the country, who will be in the seat, etc. But without waiting for it, they told us that they will cut Afghanistan by September 11. But by now, most of Afghanistan forces and the NATO forces have left Afghanistan. So the regional countries and President Biden, I think he was quite, he was a shrewd politician when he said that. He said two things. Afghanistan is the responsibility of Afghan leaders. And then Afghanistan, any unrest, any civil war, then it is the responsibility of the regional countries. Because they have to suffer, so they have to play a role.
Right. Okay, let me come back to you. Michael, what about China's role? Do you think that China will play an extended role in Afghanistan now that, the Americans will leave, considering that it seems like Afghans are not averse to the Chinese influence there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that we should overstate this idea of, regional countries stepping in to fill this vacuum left by the U.S. just because so long as the war continues, there's only so much that these countries, including China, can do in Afghanistan. And China has been a very modest economic player. It hasn't really been very present in Afghanistan because of the war. But clearly, it has a strong interest in more stability. One reason being that it wants to be able to do more infrastructure projects. It wants to bring the Belt and Road Initiative to Afghanistan. And also it worries about the presence of this terror group, this TIP, which is mainly comprised of Uyghur militants. And it wants to deal with that threat. So, we've already seen China play a quietly more active diplomatic role in terms of occasionally providing or hosting meetings with Taliban members and so on and so forth. And I expect that can grow. And I think that one thing that we might well see, especially if the peace process doesn't pick up, we might well see that China try to reach out to quietly reach out to the Taliban to try to explore what areas, if there's any type of arrangement that could be brokered between the two sides that would enable, for example, China to do infrastructure projects in areas of Afghanistan that are controlled by the Taliban. And as we know, there are more and more areas that are controlled by the Taliban each day. The Taliban has been very blunt and direct in saying that it would support any infrastructure project in the country that meets in Afghan national interests and Afghan national goals. The interesting thing is the Taliban has formally endorsed the TAPI pipeline, which is an infrastructure initiative that's sponsored by the U.S. and includes India. So if the Taliban is willing to endorse that, one would expect the Taliban to support, in theory, infrastructure projects conducted by the Chinese. There's really no bad blood between the Taliban and China. So yes, I do think that we could expect to see China do more, and to the extent that China tries to become more involved in Afghanistan, it will be quietly, behind the cameras. It would not want to make a big public show of this. But I do think that you will see China try to engage more, broaden its set of contacts, engage more with the Taliban to enable Beijing to proceed in pursuing its interest in the country, which above all consists of doing more with the infrastructure projects. Again, it will be difficult to do that with the war going on, but with the Taliban controlling so much territory, China may conclude that if it can work out some arrangements to deepen its footprint in Afghanistan in those areas, if the Taliban gives buy-in for that, well, then that could be something that it pursues as well. And separately, it could well try to address...
Yasir Sahab, do you agree? You think that it's going to be a different kind of influence that China will now exert over Afghanistan?
See, first of all, you have to read the Chinese mindset, how the Chinese Communist Party operates. China in last few decades have developed a very strong army, but they don't want to wage wars. They want to dominate different parts of the world, but through economic activity. And especially for the integrity of BRI, Afghanistan lies at a very critical juncture. So geographically, peace in Afghanistan is very important for China, because when China is trying to go through the Central Asian region and CPEC through Pakistan, going into the hot waters, or the warm waters, I must say, China is very, very keen on seeing itself setting a footprint in Afghanistan. It has done so in other countries, it has done so in Africa, it has even gone to South America. So Afghanistan is at its doorstep. So it's very important, and China will, as Michael was also saying, there will be a lot of infrastructure projects, and China will use them as a leverage to influence the Afghan decision-making through the money it flows into the Afghan hands. Just like what it has done with Iran, because China never wanted Iran to go into the Indian hands.
So the vacuum that America will leave, to that extent?
It is actually in China's interest. China was waiting for the Americans to leave and so that it can come over. And now China, in collaboration with Russia. Russia was one time enemy of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the reason for the breakup of USSR. But now even the Taliban leadership is sitting in Moscow and they're talking to the Russians. So Russia and China together want to have that influence, the vacuum that Americans, as he was also mentioning, they've actually left in a hurry. The Doha peace talks, they have been deadlocked. They started, there was a view that they will agree on a framework for a future government, but the the impasse could not be overcome, and the Americans basically just left, packed their bags and left. This is the opportunity for the Chinese and the Russians to come in and take over that void. Pakistan they have a very, very convenient way of operating through Pakistan as well. Pakistan would not want to come in the forefront and would let the Chinese take the leading role, China being a superpower, and the economic might China has. So China will take, and it's in Pakistan's interest
to let China do that, right?
Yes, Pakistan will let China do that, and it's in Pakistan's interest, because India's role will be diminished. And that's what Pakistan wants, that India should be upstick from Afghanistan, where our western border is no longer threatened by the Indians, which was the case in case of the Northern Alliance government or the coalition governments in the last 10 years. So Pakistan would be very keen on China taking a leading role, and Pakistan would just stand behind China, Russia and China. So I think China has a very great role to play, and Americans would not be happy with that. Nobody actually who the NATO allies would not be happy for China to come over. But this is what is in the offing. This is what is written on the wall. Chinese will come over sooner than later. They've done that in Africa. They're going everywhere. They've reached out to Iran, which was never possible. They've given them $420 billion in the next 25 years, and they're developing Chabahar. They've literally taken Iran out of India.
What about the Indian reaction? Do you think we can expect an Indian reaction, Hassan Saab? Because, you know, the recent bombing that happened in Johor town, of course, there's no formal, I mean, we haven't had anyone say categorically that India was behind it. But do you think that we can expect some sort of reaction from India?
Look, I think there is two. One is India interest in Afghanistan, one is India interest in Pakistan. So definitely Pakistan and India have their own problems and their own issues. As you mentioned, the Johor town, and Johor town incident happened the day when the FATF was sitting and deciding on the Pakistan future to be blacklisted, to be grey-listed, to be whitelisted, etc. And on the same day it happened. So definitely you see the Pakistan has the NSA, and the other day they shared with the parliamentary committee India's involvement in the and definitely look, whenever there is as long as there is a vacuum in Afghanistan and there is unrest in Afghanistan, so if either it is India, either it is Iran, in any country, they will use it against you, and you will also have interest there, because Afghanistan currently it is in a quagmire. In a way, everybody has their own proxies. Like, it's not only Pakistan which has proxies in Afghanistan. India have more proxies, Iran have, Turkey have, the Arab country have. Every country has proxies in Afghanistan. So if the situation stabilizes in Afghanistan, so that is in the interest of Pakistan, because then there will be a stable government. Afghanistan will be under control of Kabul, the entire Afghanistan, and Pakistan will be able to secure its own border areas from any infiltration from across the border. So I think currently, I'm not of the definitely. Indians are trying to extend their hand to the Taliban. There were reports that they were having a meeting in Doha, and when the Taliban delegation were in Tehran, the Indian foreign ministers, there were reports the Indian foreign minister was also in Tehran. So India are taking interest in the developing situation in Afghanistan. So definitely, so far India has a policy to have good relation with Kabul. Whosoever is in Kabul, India played their ball so far well. Unfortunately, we Pakistani have, I think, vis-a-vis Afghanistan, we have started with the parties out of Afghanistan, right from the communist revolutions, then Mujahideen, and then Taliban, and then when Karzai came in, when Ashraf Ghani came. So I think Pakistan is now formulating its new policy, and it was good in Parliament they discussed it, that in Afghanistan, the past is past. We will be with whoever is chosen by the people of Afghanistan. So Pakistan will support them. I think that is the right policy. So far Pakistan is doing it.
But what about the fact that now we talk about, you know, earlier on, Yasir have also mentioned that there is talk about a different Taliban, that this is a different Taliban. How does that benefit us?
I think I was of the opinion since long when the US started. Taliban were once they were savages from they were likened as savages from the Gothic novels by Bruce Riddell, if you remember him. And then one fine morning we saw American president saying that they are fine boys. I think there's a lot of efforts are going on to build image of the Taliban. I know the opinion, but what Taliban is doing currently, we do not need to look into their statement. I think we need to look into their actions. What right now, what they are doing. They are attacking, the violence in Afghanistan has increased phenomenally during the last more than 1 year. Taliban never sit for a day. Civilians are being attacked, schools are being attacked, military installations are being attacked, government people are being attacked, opposition leaders are being attacked. So these are the actions the Taliban are doing. So far, I have my interaction with some of the Afghan leaders who are in Doha, especially the women participant of the government team. They say that Taliban, those who are in Doha, they are not serious in talks. They just coming on the table vestige of the time. So far, they haven't discussed even agree on the agenda. So if sometime our foreign ministers, I think it was yesterday's statement that Taliban, there is a lot of changes in Taliban. This is what the US is saying. Look, Mahrukh, we Pakistani have a problem. We Pakistani look into Afghanistan from the Western eyes. Because we Pakistani do not have any direct presence in Afghanistan except our embassy. But the US press is reporting from Kabul and elsewhere in Afghanistan, what the European press is reporting from Kabul and elsewhere in Afghanistan, we in Pakistan, we took those reports as holy scriptures, whether it is the American press, whether it is the French, whether it is the British one. So I think that is where we Pakistani do some certain blunders. We are looking at Afghanistan from their angle.
You're saying nothing has changed. This is only
I believe in Afghanistan, nothing has changed.
Okay,
This is only image building. This is the image building of Taliban, which we Pakistanis are, whether knowingly or unknowingly, doing it. But the West and the US, they are doing it purposely. The reason is they left Afghanistan now. They are telling their people that when we were fighting the people, they were savages from the Gothic novels. And now the new Taliban, they are not savages from the Gothic novel.
Okay.
They are fine boys.
Okay. Let me just get Michael's opinion. Michael, do you agree? You think that it's the same people, but there is a conscious effort being made to change the image of Taliban when we hear all this talk about how it's a different kind of Taliban in Afghanistan now?
Yeah, fortunately, it's the Taliban. And we're looking at a group that certainly has evolved in some senses, in that you have leaders that use cell phones and are willing to take selfies and so on and so forth. But we shouldn't be fooled by those superficial differences. I mean, all of the indications of how the Taliban is governing in the areas that they control right now suggest that their tactics are just as brutal and draconian, and particularly in terms of how women are treated compared to how things were in the late 90s, and that's very problematic. And I think it's important to distinguish between the senior Taliban leaders, particularly in Doha, the political office in Doha and the top leadership, to distinguish between them and the leaders on the battlefield. You hear a lot of conciliatory diplomatic statements and talk from the Taliban leadership based in Doha, which has always represented the more moderate factions of the group. But anytime a major top battlefield commander is interviewed by the press, it's basically the same message. We're just waiting to conquer Kabul. There's really doesn't seem to be any interest among these leaders on the ground in laying down their arms and agreeing to talks. And I think that the question is who's going to win that argument, so to speak, in terms of those that are preaching peace off the battlefield and those that are on the battlefield that say that they're just going to keep fighting to the end. As I had said before, I don't see any reason why the Taliban has any incentive to seriously entertain peace talks right now. Not when they think they're winning the war and think that they could win it fairly soon. So I wish that I were wrong, and certainly there's some that take a different perspective, that argue that you have younger generations of Taliban leaders now that are more moderate than the previous generation. But again, the key data point here is what is going on in areas of Afghanistan that are controlled by the Taliban. And every indication, based on the researchers and media that have gone there, is that some really troubling things are happening, very similar to what was the case back in the late 1990s. The final point, I think that the one key issue here is the issue of legitimacy, right? We keep hearing that the Taliban values the legitimacy and the recognition that it has from the international community, particularly since it signed that agreement with the United States. And the question is, if that's true, would the Taliban indeed be willing to eventually sit down and negotiate with the broader Afghan state, knowing that if it were to keep fighting and keep doing horrific things, that it would lose that legitimacy and become a global pariah as it used to be, and it doesn't want to have that reputation. So I think that's the big question when thinking about what type of Taliban do you have these days. Has it changed? That would be a change if it does value that legitimacy and recognition that it thinks it's received from the international community.
Right, let me go to Yastab. Yastab, you seem to disagree.
On the issue of the Taliban being transformed in something new, see, he's right in a way that he says whatever information we are getting is from the Western media from Afghanistan. Having said that, Afghan Taliban agreed last year and this year with the Americans that we will not attack you, and they have fulfilled that promise.
Okay.
Afghan Taliban have clearly demonstrated, agreed and declared that we will not interfere in our neighboring countries, which is primarily saying about Pakistan. We will not do anything outside our borders or on the other side in the Central Asian states. So I think This is not the Taliban that we knew of. More importantly, it's a perception about Taliban that the Taliban are those barbarians. However, if you see the fact, now they control more than 200 districts in Afghanistan. How many districts that you know of they have taken control of with fighting? Basically, the Afghan government forces have just given up. They have been just giving up, and Taliban have been going to them